This next book started with a flight to Des Moines and the author telling her seatmate, a stranger, that she was speaking at a women's conference. His reaction? Well, he froze. Then he apologized. Then he tried to blurt out something about diversity training and then spent the rest of the flight in awkward silence. So begins That's What She Said, Joanne Lipman's new book exploring gender equality in the workplace. And she's joining us in studio this morning with more. I was so looking forward not only to reading this, but to discussing it with you. Give us some more details. So what happened on that flight?
Right. So this man, lovely man, we're talking about his kids and the sports teams, great conversation. Then he says, why are you going to Des Moines? And I said, well, I'm going to speak at a women's leadership conference. And he freezes and he goes, sorry, I'm a man.
Oh, no.
And tells me about this diversity training where he felt like it was 2 days of him being beaten up and put in the corner. And he said it was like punishment. And he came away, he said, with one message. And that message was, it's all your fault. And you know what? He's not wrong, unfortunately.
And not alone. This is a conversation that's happening a lot.
Right. So there's been diversity training for the last 30 years, really started out as a result of legal challenges. And actually, there's been research that looks at 30 years of diversity training, more than 700 companies, and found that it actually has backfired for women as well as for African American or Black men and women.
In what way? What's the problem?
And the problem is there are several issues with the training, but a bottom line issue is that for a lot of the men who were being trained, they felt that it was punishment and they had a lot of resentment. And as a result, they either said, okay, I checked that box and didn't do anything about it, or they really got resentful about being targeted. And so, so the point of That's What She Said is to bring men into the conversation because, what a shame for us to take men who are potentially our allies in closing the gender gap and alienating them instead.
All right. You open the book by saying there'll be no man-shaming, no male-bashing, no finger-pointing. Why did you feel it was important to put that statement right up front?
Yeah, I feel it's so important because women talk about the issues we face at work all the time. Amongst ourselves, issues like feeling marginalized and overlooked, underpaid, and just not as respected as the man who's sitting right next to us. But women talking to each other is half a conversation. And at best, together, we can solve, half the problem. We really need men to join us if we're really going to have permanent solutions.
So how do we have the conversations that we have as women about things that happen in the workplace? And, we notice things that are unfair, people talking over you, taking credit for ideas. These are things that women talk about and sometimes we'll laugh about because it doesn't feel like there's any other solution, and bring men into that conversation so they don't feel like they're the ones who are the bad guys.
Right, so That's What She Said is handing it, reaching out to men and saying, okay, here's what the issues are, and let's make them discussable. And I actually, to write the book, I crisscrossed the United States and the globe, really looking for men, executive men primarily, who are trying to close the gap. And what I did is I spoke with them about, what have you learned? What are some strategies that we can take away? What are some actionable items that we can actually use, all of us, to help close the gap?
There's a chapter in here that's called We're All a Little Bit Texas, and you reference Google imaging. There's 3 words, doctor, nurse, and CEO, and the algorithms all produced interesting results. We wanted to see if they held up. So this is what we did. We Googled doctor. These are the images that came up.
Yep.
Predominantly male and predominantly white.
Yep.
Nurses, we got this, mostly women. And then for CEO, that's what the picture looks like. What does that tell us? What message does that send?
Well, so Google really is a measure of sort of our subconscious and what we believe. Those algorithms are telling us this is what we think of when we think doctor, nurse, CEO. Your CEO, Google here, produced just, I think, 1 or 2 women. When I did it, when I was working on the book, there was only 1 female, and it was CEO Barbie was the only female who appeared. And it tells you that there are these stereotypes that are so deeply ingrained, and we talk about unconscious bias, which are these stereotypes that we all hold, and they're biases that are so deeply held inside of us that we don't necessarily even know that they exist.
You say that there is a country in the world that has got this right, and it's Iceland. What can we learn from Iceland?
So Iceland is the #1 country in the world for gender equality, according to the World Economic Forum. So I went to Iceland and spent time there because I wanted to know, what does that feel like? And the fact is that actually Icelanders will tell you they don't believe that if they are number one in the world for gender equality, then it just shows you how bad the world is and how much further we have to go. Because they do have a gender gap. They still have some of the same issues. But the big difference that I found in Iceland was this is a very, very macho country, and it's filled with fishermen and farmers. But you talk to the fishermen and the farmers and these very macho men, and they will say, of course I am a feminist. The word feminist, which elsewhere in the world is such a politicized word, there it's just like saying, of course I'm human. And so men and women alike believe that the system is stacked against women. And I think that's the biggest difference, is that the men believe it as much as the women do.
There's so many more issues that we can get into in the book, but I would encourage people to read it, men and women, or if you're running a company, take a look. The back page has a cheat sheet, tips and takeaways for men and women in a corporate and a business setting. Such a great story and a great book. Thanks, Joanne.
Thanks for having me.